I'm focused on making a movement. And the movement is all about leaders knowing how to lead people who are not like them, who have the courage and the bravery to do this tough stuff, have the hard conversations so that we can move this thing in the right direction. And so I want to do my part to help them be whatever it is that God created them to be.
Did you ever know that you were my shero? That's a song I could sing over and over again to Stephanie Chung. She's our guest, and she's a trailblazer in the aviation industry. She's actually the kid of a military family. As the first Black woman to run a major private aviation company, she's been breaking barriers left and right. Her influence extends to broad roles with organizations like Make-A-Wish Foundation and the National Business Aviation Association. But Stephanie's career exemplifies surpassing expectations, inspiring others through human connections, and teaching it forward. Enjoy this conversation with Stephanie Chung. So welcome home, Stephanie.
I'm good. I'm glad to be home, Janice. Thank you for having me.
Listen, it feels as though I've known you before now. I don't know if it's because we kind of follow each other or we, admire each other in a certain way, but it's just so great to be sitting here talking with you and talking about welcome home. Are you home right now?
I am home, and I'm really excited because my daughter just flew in as well. And so she's home, and like when your kids are older and you get, and they're adults, you're like, yay, my baby's home. So
it does. It feels
everybody's home right now.
Yeah. I mean, during COVID, we all kind of like, well, okay, I love home. Am I getting a little much of it? But at the end of the day, it feels really great. And
yes,
I got to tell you, talking about home, reviewing some of your past interviews, it seems that growing up on military bases wasn't just a part of your past. There's a big piece of who you are. And it was home for you, a kind of a mobile home, a home in motion.
Thank you for that.
Stephanie. How did growing up that way set you up for the success that you're having right now? In ways that people may not realize.
Right. So first of all, that's a great question. Do you know no one's ever asked me that question before? I loved being a military brat. And I think, when I was growing up as a military brat, every child that I knew, for the most part, was also a military kid. So we had a different type of lifestyle, but we didn't know it was different because all of us were doing the same thing, right? So for an example, just for your audience, I was that military kid that grew up on active Air Force bases. So I moved every 2 years of my life. So I was always the new kid in every school, always the new, kid in the neighborhood. I always had to get to know the teachers, et cetera. And one of those traits, for an example, really helped me as I grew into adulthood because I'm incredibly adaptable. So that's the first thing. I can handle change very well. It doesn't throw me off. And I can literally talk to anyone because I've probably met someone just like them, Janice, growing up, right? They probably remind me of someone else. And so consequently, when I walk into a room or if I get to, do podcasts or certainly when I'm speaking, being able to connect with the audience is a lot easier for me, I believe, because I was always I always say I'm a professional new kid, right? And so I know how to adapt in the situation. So I'm grateful for my military upbringing in regards to, communication and it forces you as a little kid to learn leadership skills, because if I don't know how to communicate with people or read people well or just understand the dynamics, I wouldn't have any friends, right? So as a little kid, I learned a lot of what it is that I do now as a profession, which is speaking, to top companies about leadership and how to communicate better with their people, right? So that was one thing. The other thing I would tell you that a lot of people don't realize is I grew up around excellence. And this is, I think, probably the most important thing. I think we, maybe some people could argue with me, but we have the best military on the planet. And so the men and women that serve our country and protect our country are just like, nothing is even close to them, right? And what that means for me, though, as a little child, Janice, is that I grew up seeing excellence. So you don't see sloppy soldiers, right? Their hair is cut, their shoes are shined, their pants are creased. And, they've done more by 6 a.m. in the morning than most of us do all day, right? So that's one thing where you're just constantly looking at excellence. No matter where you turn, it's always excellence. So that's the first thing. Second thing is you also have cause and effect. When I grew up especially as a teenager, when you're a kid that lives on the base, if you get in trouble on the base, it's your mother or father, whoever the soldier is, that actually has to be accountable for what it is that you've done. So what that means is you're always seeing cause and effect. Like if something happens, there's a ricochet, result, right? And so that really changes how you carry yourself, because it's not, eventually I would get in trouble for sure. But at the beginning, it was really, if I did something stupid, which thankfully I was not that kid that did that. But if I did, then my father would have to go in front of his command and have to answer for it. And so that shapes you as a child and, of course, as an adult, that every single, I always go back to cause and effect. Everything has a result, good or bad, but you're accountable for it and you're in control of it. And so that shapes who I am as a professional, as a mom, as a wife, and everything else. It's like you have to be accountable, own your stuff, right? That's the first thing, and complete the mission. You start something, you finish something. So anyways, those are just some tidbits in regards to how I think growing up a military child really, truly blessed me in my life.
Those are tidbits. Those are also dynamic bits. And, for a long time and often still, I say discipline's not a dirty word. And
Right.
to hear you embrace it with fervor, with enjoyment, and with expected outcome is brilliant to me. Let me ask you, do you identify as Black?
Mm-hmm. I do.
And
Yeah.
do you identify as female?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
How did the military life that you have had as a kid impact your thoughts, abilities, or did it matter around being female and being Black as you now entered your own life and career? Or are we going too far too soon?
That's so good. I love it. This is bring it. Bring it, Janice. I love it. That's such a good question. So first, it's interesting. I was just talking to my brother about this the other day. As a little girl growing up, right? And specifically as a little Black girl growing up, I probably didn't notice it as much because the military, it's so diverse, right? And so my friends were, and people live in other countries and then they come back to the States. And so there's just a lot, it's very different. It's almost like a bubble in a weird way that when you're living on base, because most of your friends are, there's a lot of ethnic diversity. There's a lot of interracial type of marriage. And so you've got multicultural kids. And then of course you have a lot of people who lived overseas and then they came back to the States. And so this is why I love your question so much, because I've never really thought about it. But now that I'm giving it some thought, what I would say is, as a military child, what's probably drilled in your head more than race is, are they a civilian or are they in the military? Right. So that's probably more your separation is like, okay, are you a civilian or are you in the military versus are you Black or are you white? Right. And I'm not saying that doesn't exist. I'm just saying as a little kid, I didn't notice it as much. We were more focused in on, are they part of the military, family, or are they not? Right. Do they live on base? Do they not live on base? That type of thing. So that's the first answer. The second part in regards to being female. Yeah, I didn't really see a lot of female soldiers, but I remember one time when I was a teenager and I worked on base at the exchange in the deli shop or something. And there was this, I want to say she was a 3 or 4 star general that was going to be visiting the base. And she was like the first female, right? Or just a really high ranking female general or admiral or something. And so the whole base was getting ready for her. So she comes on base, and we lived on a very big base. It's its own little town, right? And she came to the deli shop to get a sandwich. And all I remember seeing is just like bars and bars and bars, like all her accomplishments and medals and stars. And I was just like in awe because I saw this female and of course soldiers saluting her and standing in attention. And, it was clear she carried the authority. And I loved that. I loved it. And so as a little girl seeing it, and at this point I was a teenager, and so seeing it and seeing how much power she carried with such grace, not saying a word, right? Like not she said anything. And, she was very kind. I made her a pastrami sandwich. I remember that part too. but I just remember how the level of
Did she
respect.
take mustard?
She did take mustard. She had the works, and I made a mean pastrami sandwich.
And she kept that regalia clean.
That's right. Now I didn't watch her eat it, so she ordered it, and then she, went someplace else probably where she could take off all that stuff and chow down.
But that also speaks to her grace because she ordered it. She didn't send for it.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And she was so good. And it's funny that you said that. I've never thought about this before. But it was the way that she carried herself. She knew she had all the power. Like she knew it, right? But she never mistreated anyone. She said hello to everyone. Mind you, we're in a deli shop, right? So it's not like, I'm not a soldier. I'm just a little kid at that point. And so she just carried herself with such grace, and she gave everyone eye contact and attention and a smile. And all of us were civilians. Again, the people who were, had to line up and were soldiers. That's a different way that she's got to treat them. But how she treated us civilians, I'll never forget it. And what that showed me is, no matter how much power you have, no matter how high you get up, like any of that stuff, it doesn't really matter. What matters is how you treat people. Because I still remember that. However many years later, I still remember how she carried herself and how she made me feel, the little interaction I had with her. But more importantly, how she set the entire atmosphere just by walking in the place, and how she controlled it and managed it with such grace and dignity.
Was it Maya who said they won't, or I paraphrase, they won't long remember what you said, but they'll always remember how you made them feel?
Exactly. Maya Angelou. Yep. She is known for saying that. And I really believe that so much. And so those are the little things that, for me, whenever, now obviously I'm not a, 4-star general, right? But whenever I'm in a room that I know that I'm carrying authority or power, I'm incredibly mindful of the surrounding, because I know that, good or bad, I can impact the environment. And I think that's something that every leader needs to be thinking about every day, all the time, day after day, that when you walk in a room, whether it's your 5th meeting, your 1st meeting, it doesn't matter. Your facial expressions, how you carry yourself, how you walk in that room, your attitude will impact the culture and impact that room and impact everybody in that room. And so you have a responsibility to carry the mantle the way it should be carried.
Absolutely. In my company, Act One Group, you may have Googled a little bit about us. And if you did, you know that we have a very strong military alliance program. And what we have found and long positioned with employers is that people with military background bring such high transferable skills. They also bring skills that are not easily found outside of the military and take a long time to gain in a regular corporate career track. Have you witnessed this? And do you think that indeed military, first of all, let me bow down and thank you. Thank you for your family service, and thank you for the work that you're doing around this. Having honored you in that way, do you find that people do bring highly transferable skills from the military into the civilian life, as you talked about noting there was a difference even as a kid, or being taught there was a difference?
Yes, absolutely. You know what I find, Janice, is that I think of it 2 different ways. So there's the regular soldiers, and I'll certainly address that in a second, because they're the majority, right? And yes, long story short, 100% they bring different skill set and technique and mental attitude and stamina into the workplace that others don't really have. But then there's the second group, which is the people who were in special forces, right? That group is unique to me because they tend to be able to function really good in chaos, right? They're actually excellent in chaos. And listen, sometimes depending on your industry, depending on what's going on, in the market, depending on just what's going on in your company, sometimes it can be chaotic. And then you can watch their skill set come to the forefront because everybody else is running around like their hair's on fire, and they're not. They're actually even more focused and more precise. And so I've always noticed that the difference between the people who served in special forces versus, the regular soldiers. Both are excellent and both are amazing and both have, a gazillion sets of skills that all of us could certainly benefit from. But I do notice the distinct differences there. Now, going back to your first question in regards to the majority of the soldiers that come on board, I absolutely do believe that they have they have, well, first of all, they tend to have a worldview. So that's the first thing. Secondly, they understand command and authority and order, right? And so where I have seen, though, sometimes that can be not a disadvantage, something I have to kind of work out of them whenever I've had to work with people who were in the military. If they had only been there a few years, so let's say they were in like 4 years versus someone who's in like 20 years, right? Because there's a difference there as well. That there are times that they're so used to doing whatever they're told to do with such excellence. But sometimes, depending on the job, it's not a job that you should be told what to do, right? Some jobs, it's like, we need you just to do it, and then we'll correct if something's off. And so there's a different level of each of the different folks. And so that's whenever I've had to lead, I'm in aviation. So obviously I've worked a lot with different military folks. And so I've always been incredibly mindful of that, because a soldier, what do they say? There is no, a soldier would do whatever it is you've told them to do. And so if they didn't do what you told them to do, then that means your communication was off, because they'll do what they're told, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's not them, it's usually you could have stepped up your game as far as communication is concerned, or been more clear, et cetera. So that, I think, is always interesting for any leader who hasn't served in the military, to be mindful that you have to know how to correctly communicate when you're leading in general, but also when you're leading people who are in the military, because it's like, no, I'm going to do exactly what you just said. So make sure what you said is what you meant, right? Yeah. So that's really interesting. But then, the other side of it, when I just think of the military in general, their skill sets. Knowing, again, not causing drama and chaos, and sometimes all the chattering that can go on in the workplace that's just not productive. Usually don't have that with the military people, right? They're there, they got a mission to complete, they got a job to do, and so they kind of save the drama for their mama. They don't bring it to the workplace. That is always refreshing, I think, for every leader, because you just want to get the job done, right? You want the right people in the right place getting the right job done, so the company can move forward. And I think that's where the military really comes in. But again, I've worked with all different levels of military. And so I love what they bring to the table. I love that they're nimble. I love that they get the job done. I love that they're smart. I love that they're culturally fluent. I love that they've usually been exposed to different things, different people. They just have a different way of looking at stuff. And if you want the job done, they won't have excuses as to why they couldn't get it done, or why they couldn't get it done on time, or this is the reason and that's the reason. You're not going to have all that stuff. And that alone, for any leader, is I think like a breath of fresh air, right? Because we just want to make sure we get the job done and keep things moving. So the military is good for that.
I think, Stephanie, the point you make about obedience is well taken, because it's not one so much as a trade-off as it is understanding then how to communicate forward.
That's right.
And I like that. I like that. Tell us a little bit about your parents.
I have the best parents. Well, so my
father, now you have the best parents for you.
For me, that's right. For me, and my daughter has the best parent for her. No,
and my grandkids have the best people for them.
That's right. Exactly. But so I'll start with my dad. My father, even the truth of the matter is, my father passed away about 2 years ago, but I still talk as if he's still here, just because in my heart he's still here. And so my father was, he grew up in a small town in North Carolina. And then he was valedictorian of his class.
Which town?
Greenville, North Carolina. A lot of people know of Greenville, South Carolina, but it turns out there's a Greenville, North Carolina too.
Well, the reason I ask you is because I didn't dig in to find out before this conversation what part of North Carolina he's from. And wow, I'm gobsmacked. I mean, I'm from Tarboro, North Carolina. And so, you know where Tarboro is?
I don't, but the way you're presenting it, it must be near Greenville.
Here's the thing. It's about 20, at max 30-minute drive from Tarboro. Yeah.
No, so you actually do know of Greenville, North Carolina.
I know
Most
Greenville,
people
North
never heard of
Carolina.
it.
So that tells me a lot about your dad, but it may
Yeah.
not tell our family a lot about him. So
Yes.
go ahead, please.
Yeah, so he grew up in that small town. He was valedictorian of his class, and he then, decided he could have gone on to college and did all kind of stuff, but it was back in the day, and so he decided to join the military, and then that way he could also he could get his education, all that stuff.
Family, for those of you who are
Yes.
not familiar with that time and with the culture, going into the military was a highly prized option for many people to going to university. Number one, it was often seen as an avenue toward university for
Right.
folks, but it also was a more immediate course for a professional life
Mhm.
if you weren't able to get into school right away or you weren't certain about what you were going to do. So going into the military really was a prized decision people made. It wasn't,
Right.
I'm going to do school or I'm going to do military. Military was wrapped inside of your idea about how you would live a professional life. And Stephanie, I happen to know that well because I have a strong military presence in my family as well. As a
Nice.
matter of fact, my niece last year, I think it was early last year, made
Mhm.
captain. So I'm really, really excited about learning about your dad. I'm going to shut up and listen more, but I want people to know a little bit of the foundation of
Yes.
his decision making.
No, absolutely. And so he decided to join the Air Force. He ended up becoming an airman. So he flew on aircraft that were they have a radar because he was in the radars part of the military. And so really, he didn't have a job where he could talk about it a lot. But I remember having a conversation with him as I got older, and he said it in an easiest way. It was like, what I did, Steph, is what they now have drones to do.
Yeah.
And so, my job was to fly and control and patrol the border to make sure that the country was safe and we didn't have any type of enemy infiltration, right? And so that's really what my father did.
And
But
we
my father
thank him
was
for it.
Yes, thank you. And he was an incredible man. Just my father, I can tell you, never, ever. He's never raised his voice at me. He's never, and trust me, I did some stuff where I probably deserved to be yelled at, right? And so, but I've never, ever, my father never raised his voice. And it's just a really, thoughtful man, a man full of dignity. And the way that he carried himself was always a great example of what he expected of, us kids as well. And so my father, apple of my eye, and I'm definitely a daddy's girl. And so my father, when he left the military, he was a master sergeant in the U.S. Air Force. And that's the highest you can go, because though he went go into college, he actually didn't go to college. He ended up going right into becoming an airman and things like that. And so he reached the highest rank, for the people who didn't have a college degree. And provided us with an incredible life, and I'm so grateful for it. And the things that I learned from my dad, I'll tell you, Janice, when I got my very first leadership job, very first one, I remember calling my father and I was like, Dad, they just promoted me and I really want to do a good job, and what kind of things would you recommend? And he shared with me three things that I still, till this day, literally still, like, it's how I lead, right? So the two things that he actually said, two things, not three things, two things. One, always protect your team. And two, always know there's two sides to every story. And that was his leadership advice to me. And so, I can tell you a gazillion stories of the times that I had an opportunity and I chose protect the team, and then also my team always knew, never go into Stephanie's office if you've got a gripe with somebody else without that other person in there, because she wants to hear both sides of the story, right? So I still lead by those two premises that my father gave me back in the day. So that's a little bit about my dad, born and raised in North Carolina, just an incredible man, family man. And the thing my father did, because we moved every 2 years, is whenever we were moving to a new place, there was this whole ritual. So at dinner, he would tell us his new assignment. And then, at that point, then we have to get ready to pack up and move to wherever that state is. Or if he would go out of the country, then we would always come back to where my mother was born, which I'll talk about that in a second. But my father always made the move an adventure. And so no matter what, if we were living in Florida and all of a sudden we were getting stationed in Colorado or something like that, he would make that drive from Florida to California a tourist type of event. So we would stop along the way. We'd see the different parts of the country, and then spend time and learning about whatever it is that we're seeing, whether it's beautiful mountains or some kind of theme park or some kind of town with history. He made it an adventure. And so consequently, I've seen this entire country, right? I've either lived in the state or I've been through the state. And so he put travel, not just aviation, but travel in my blood as well, just by the way that he opened our eyes as kids to always know about the world and especially about our country and different people and different cultures and different demographics and regions, and to really not just explore it, but to appreciate it. Right. And appreciate all the differences that this country has to offer, both whether people or landscape or, what have you. So that was my dad. My mother, fast forward, so my father was born in the South, my mother born in the North. Okay. And so she was born and raised in Cape Cod, Massachusetts. And she my mother is a fire rocket. She is like 87 years old right now. She drives a blue Volkswagen Bug and it's turbo. Okay. That's my mother. She drives like she's like always in a hurry, and with the turbo, I was like, Mom, how do you have a turbo car, right? And she bought it from some guy. She didn't know it was turbo when she bought it. She just wanted a Volkswagen Bug. She liked the color, and this guy worked on cars, and so it was his car originally, and he turboed it out, right? And so that is like I have a Porsche. That car is faster than my Porsche, right? My mother at 87 is like rolling around, driving in her blue Volkswagen Bug.
I love that, and you're going to have to send me a picture of her doing that. I promise you, it will not hit social media, but
She's amazing. She is amazing. The heart of gold. And one of the things that I love, about this conversation in general is a lot of people don't think about, we think about the soldiers and we honor the soldiers as we should, but we really don't think about the spouses, because that meant every 2 years, my mother had to find a new job. Right. And, those are the kind of things that nobody thinks about.
That's what we do. We find work for military spouses and family.
Yes. See, and it's so important.
That's a big thrust of our military program. But anyway,
Janice, it's so important because people just don't think about that part. We're just not programmed to think that way. But so I watched my mother not only have to, move the family every 2 years, but also she then, had to go get a job, get us settled in school, all those different things that she did. And she did it with such grace, never complaining, always making sure that the household and the environment was fun and loving and adventurous. And so my mother's still that way now. Now there's grandkids and, we're bigger in size as far as family is concerned. And she has always been that person. She has a heart for children. Most of her work she did working in the school system. So like substitute teacher or teacher's assistant. That way, whenever we'd move, she could, just kind of get implemented into whatever that school system is. And she loves like little kids and all that stuff, right? So that's my mom. Now she lives in Virginia. She's, like I said, my father has passed away. And my mother, she cared for my father, had dementia as he passed away. So she cared for him for many years before his passing. But once he passed on, my mother's a woman of faith. She was like, all right, he's with the Lord. He's all set. And now, now she's living her life and kind of grabbing those years back that she was taking care of my dad. And so I love it. She, just cut her hair recently. She's going short like me. And I'm like, Ma, you looking hot. You looking good, girl. So she is incredible. She grew up a child of 9. And so I have lots of aunts and uncles, lots of cousins, and we're really, really close family, but most of them are still up in the Northeast. And so my mother, my grandfather, my mother's father, was one of the first Cape Verdeans that came from the Cape Verde Islands in Africa to the United States. And so we have, some history there on the Cape and a museum about our family and all that stuff because he was the first one here. And so anyways, I love my family there. I could go on and on and on, but my mother is amazing. And I have one sibling who's my brother, and he's an older brother. And so he's my best buddy. And so, he lives in Boston too. So. or Boston now, I should say.
Well, you got to thank your brother for whatever contribution he made. I'm sure it was tremendous, and especially your mom, and
Yeah.
for your dad, for the incredible person you are, Stephanie. Because for those of us who admire your amazing career, we're just so grateful that you're doing what you do. Let me ask you this. What made you decide it was time to tell your story and write this book, Ally Leadership? I mean, what did you want people to understand about leadership that they may be missing? Started to allude to earlier your perspective of what leadership should include, which is compassionate listening, right?
Absolutely. So thank you for that. And yes, I just wrote a book that just came out last week, or last month rather, and it's called Ally Leadership: How to Lead People Who Are Not Like You. And Ally is actually a acronym. So it stands for Ask, Listen, Learn, and You Take Action. That's what the Ally stands for. And the reason why I wrote the book, let's face it, Janice, this is my story. I am a Black woman married to a Japanese guy. I have a Chinese last name, and I come from an all-white male-dominated industry. Okay, so I've had to maneuver and throughout change and really kind of how do you work when things are so unfamiliar. And one of the reasons why I wrote the book is because we have to have a good understanding. And I know the industry that you're in, you already know this. But we as leaders have to come to grips about the modern workforce, today's workforce. We have 5, soon to be 6 generations working, which is unheard of. And so their ages anywhere from 16 to 75. So that's a lot of different generations that are in the workplace, and they all have a different perspective and expectation and work ethic and the way that they see things and wants and needs. And so all the generations are different. The way that a boomer shows up is very different than Gen Z/Zoomer, right?
And not just in the workplace, seeking higher.
Yes, exactly.
Like
exactly.
As you get up the spectrum of age.
100%, 100%. So that's the first thing, right? We've got all these different generations working. Second thing is, at least here in North America, women are the majority of the population. So that impacts the workplace and workforce. Then you look at the demographics, right? So you've got the Black, Asian, and Hispanic race continuing to grow. You have the non-ethnic race continuing to shrink. That changes the dynamics in the workplace. Then on top of that, you add in people with different abilities, right? Or different able-bodied folks. You have people with different neurodiversity. You have LGBTQ plus community. There is a lot of change and difference. So as leaders, we have our hands full leading people who are not like each other, let alone not like us. And so the reason why I wrote the book was I felt 2 things. One, as leaders, we have to know how to lead everybody. I would say leaders of today have to know how to lead all God's children, every race, every creed, every gender. Period. It's not a maybe I should, or, maybe I'll do it later, or, well, I don't like if they're not like me. None of that stuff matters. At this point, if you're a leader and you want to remain relevant, you better know how to lead everybody. So that was the first reason why I wrote the book. Now,
back to the military.
Yes, exactly, right? That's just kind of the way it is. And I actually credit and use the military and sporting teams as an example of industries that do it well, right? That they grab a whole lot of people who have a whole slew of different backgrounds, and they have to figure out how to get them all on the same page so you can win, right? And so, and winning in sports is different than winning in the military. Winning could be life and death in the military, right? And so that I did.
And in business.
And in business. Yes, exactly. So that was the first reason, was just really helping leaders understand, here's the reality of today's modern workforce. And so I use that because I come from an industry that no one was like me. I was the first, to hit a lot of different of levels, but that's because nobody else was like me. And so I had to learn how to lead people who were not like me, and I was not like them. And so in that book, I give a lot of stories, Janice, of times that I did it well and times that I didn't necessarily do it well, right? And so that's it. It's really almost my love letter to leaders, saying, listen, here's the reality of the modern workforce, and you better get on board and figure out how to lead them. That's the first thing. Second thing is, on a selfish level, I felt like a lot of the conversation, Janice, and I'm going to go a little bit deeper, was very much focused towards white men and talking to them about here's how you lead women and people of color. And so I get the reason why that's important. When you look at the statistics, I think the last stats I looked at when writing the book was, white men control 87% of corporate America leadership positions. So it's certainly, you can't ignore that, that is a obvious a group that you have to make sure that they're on board and that they understand how to lead people who aren't like them. But I do think that there are times that the conversation needs to go deeper and wider. So one, every leader needs to know how to lead people who are not like them, not just white men. I mean, the leadership cycle is changing as well. And so if you're a woman and now you're leading a team that most likely it's always been led by men, well, how do you do it now? Right. And so everybody's in this really interesting time. Now, the other side of it, going back to white men, is I do believe that, I believe that most normal functioning human beings want to be a really great leader to everybody. That's what I do believe. And, and so, but how you do it is something that they haven't necessarily been taught, right? So we're like, go out there and lead women and people of color, Mr. White Guy. And yet we've not necessarily given them tools on how exactly to do that. And then if they make a mistake, they get slaughtered, right? People are just like cancel, and just socially slaughter them. And so, they're kind of stuck like, okay, I want to do it, but I'm afraid if I make a mistake, so therefore I don't do it. And I'm kind of stuck. And that that clogs up the entire system. Right?
Yeah, Stephanie, but ally leadership is a love letter to leaders. I believe it is. Yeah. And so you're talking about people maybe missing the tools or not identifying the tools they need to lead in what basically is a fully diverse world, or at least environment from where they operate. So now you've got leaders who have to understand not only the diversity of their customers, but the diversity of the people they're leading. And typically these are decision makers if you're talking about the senior level. Yep. So given that you've written this love letter for our audience, our family listening right now, what could you whisper in their ear as some tools or some gifts for how they lead or how they teach their leaders to lead?
Exactly. Well, the one thing I would say is, I said ally was an acronym, and it really is if you just start with asking, listening, learning, and then you taking action. The thing I really want leaders to understand, and I say this throughout the book, is you can't call yourself an ally. You can't call yourself an ally. You can, any more than I can call myself a nice person. I can't go, well, I'm a nice person, right? Somebody else can call me a nice person, but I can't call myself a nice person. Same with allyship. Just because here's what happens, Janice, and I speak all over the place to all kind of people, and leadership is the subject that I speak on. Inevitably, when I'm done speaking at a keynote, I will have, men that will come to me. I'll use men as an example. And they'll say, this was great. I love it. And, I'm an ally. Like, I'm married. I got 3 daughters. Like, I'm an ally. And my follow-up question is always this. That's awesome. I'd love to hear that. Tell me, what have you done this week to show your allyship? Crickets. They can't give me examples, right? So my whole point for everybody is you can't just say you're an ally without any receipts to back it up. Now, how do you get receipts? Well, you got to take action, right? People need to see you being an ally. And usually what happens is, what tends to happen is when there's an opportunity to show your allyship, a lot of people will shrink away and they won't do it because either they're afraid of making a mistake or they don't want to make everybody uncomfortable. And so they say nothing. They see stuff, but they say nothing. And really what I'm challenging leaders to do is to say, that's no longer acceptable. You must step up. And so if you see something, whether it is, regardless of who it is, you must not just be like, oh, well, that guy's getting ready to tell a sexist joke and I don't feel comfortable, so I'm going to leave the table. No. You get no credit for that. If you're getting ready to hear a sexist joke, you shut it down. That's how you show your allyship, not because you got up and left, because the guy's still telling the joke. right? So those are the kind of things that I'm really hitting in the book of like, we all have to step up. And I use examples for everybody, black, white, gay, straight, men, women, nobody is safe, right? It's like everybody.
Ally.
Ally is ally, exactly. And so that's really the point behind it. So the ally acronym I've already shared, but really it's all about, now how do I become an ally? You earn the title, and earn is an acronym as well. Earn stands for the E, you establish an environment where people feel seen, appreciated, and psychologically safe. That comes from the leadership. Like, this is not something you can pass on to the manager. This starts at the C-suite level. You must create that environment, i.e. culture, that people are seen, appreciated, and psychologically safe. That's E. A, you have to assure alignment, right? The left hand has to know what the right hand's doing. And I tell a lot of different stories because I always came up through the ranks overseeing sales teams. And, sales and marketing can have an interesting relationship.
Mhm.
Sales and finance can really have an interesting relationship. And so how do you get it where you assure that the entire organization is in alignment? You know why we're here. You know what it is that you do and how it impacts us as a company, and what we as a company, what is our purpose? Why are we here? What's our vision? What are we getting accomplished? You as the leader must assure alignment. So that's the A. The R is you got to rally the troops, right? You can have a lot of fun with this. You get a bunch of people who feel safe and seen, and they know why they're here and they're in alignment, and you get them focused on a certain cause. They are unstoppable. Unstoppable. There is nothing they cannot accomplish. And so the R is about rallying the troops. And I tell some stories on that. And then the last part is in. And in is all about navigating the narrows. Listen, I come from aviation. Everything's about navigation. Yeah. Where are we going? How are we getting there? When are we supposed to get there? Where are we supposed to be climbing at? Like everything is based on the navigational system. And so I use as an example in aviation, there's a rule called the 1 in 60 rule. And it's basically whenever a pilot is flying, if they're just 1 degree off, they have to make the adjustments right then and there. And so I use that as a guide for leaders as to, when you're doing this thing called ally leadership, you're going to have to navigate and make sure that you're always on course. And so how do you track? How do you process that, et cetera? So that's really what the book is about.
And that's true for every phase of the business and every approach to the business.
Yes.
Navigation. Stephanie, you say, and I agree, one cannot call oneself an ally. You also say something, or you have said something that resonates strongly, and that is that employees are more than just employees. Now, what does that look like in practice, and how has this mindset changed the way you connect with your team?
Yes. So thank you for that question. It's really simple for me. When I go back to always protect your team, right? And always know there's two sides of the story. The way that I've always seen my team is that they're individuals first, and they're human beings first, right? They're not yes, they're my employee, but beyond that, there's somebody's, let's just use if one of my sales directors, let's say, he's also somebody's husband, somebody's dad,
right?
He's somebody's son,
right?
And yes, he's my employee too. Now, and this goes back to the story that I told with the 4-star female general lady, and how I watched her carry herself. Here's the thing I know for sure, that when that employee is working that day for me, right, however I treat him is going to have an impact of how he then goes home, treats his wife, treats his kids, treats the dog, whatever, right? And so all of that is, once you realize that, it makes you much more mindful, because we as leaders are always, every company says we want our people to bring their whole selves to work. Well, be careful with that, because their whole self is their whole self. They are so much more complex than just your employee. And so therefore, how that shows up for me is, I know that whether it's good information or maybe information that I've got to share that's not going to be, make their day, if you will. However, I'm always aware when I say it, how I say it, and what environment I'm saying it, because no matter what, I've got to make sure that I'm always leaving people's dignity intact. That's job one, right? And so if I'm having a bad day as a leader, and then I kind of snap at the employee for something they did or didn't do, right? Now what that does is now the employee goes home and now they're going to snap at their wife. They're not going to play with the kids. They're not taking the dog out. They're in a bad mood. I've changed that entire culture in that household by something that I did or didn't do that may or may not have had anything to do with them. That's the power leaders hold. And I don't think that sometimes we think of it in that kind of complexity.
And they bring it back the next day and the next day.
Exactly.
That's
right. Yes. And so for me, I'm a big believer of, we as leaders have to understand the power that we hold, and that I'm not saying you don't have to make the tough decisions, have the tough conversations. I mean, we're still the leaders. And so all that needs to take place, but there's a way to do it. And no matter how busy you are, because I think a lot of times we leaders have a lot of excuses. I'm just so busy. And it's true. The world's got a lot thrown at leaders right now. And so leadership is tough, but it doesn't change the fact that for me personally, Janice, I believe that I will be accountable one day. I'll have to stand in front of God and be like, okay, how did I handle the people he gave me influence over? And I want to be able to be with complete confidence that I handled them with care, that I helped them and I didn't hurt them.
That's right. And, you think about it, the workplace this day is such a mix. We've already talked about having baby boomers working and competing with, Gen Z. So what does this mean when we think about this diverse group in terms of not just getting along, but truly thriving together? Is that the responsibility or role of a leader to have people thrive as a concert to having the business thrive? Is that a fair question to ask you?
Yeah, it's a fair question because I think you can do both. I think as a leader, your responsibility is to do both, right? It's not either or. We as leaders have a fiscal responsibility to get the job done. Right? Now, what that means as far as the people part is then we also have a responsibility to make sure we have the right people in the right position who can bring, all their talents and gifts to the table, and that we are spending a majority of our time making sure that iron sharpens iron, that our people are growing, that they're accepting the challenge, that they're being developed. That's where our focus should be. So if we're focused on the people and having the best people, attracting the top talent and keeping the top talent, and then making sure that they're constantly growing and developing and that they're working together as a team and got good synergies going and everybody's gifts and talents are being utilized. You do that. The business part's easy, right? What's the goal? What's the number? What are we trying to get accomplished? Good, done, right? It's the people part that tends to get a little more complex because people can be messy. Right? Like, let's have that conversation. People can be messy. And so if you go into it realizing that you're not looking for perfect people, they don't exist, but you're definitely looking for how do I create this team that can create a perfect result? And the perfect result is getting the number accomplished based on whatever the shareholders or the board or the investors say is the number that needs to be accomplished. So I don't think it's an either or, Janice. I think really great leaders know that those are the two you have to do in order to be considered a great leader, not just by your people, but also by your board or by, investors or what have you, right? I mean, you're serving a lot of people. There's a lot of customers that you have to serve. And so greatness, though, is a concentrated effort. It doesn't just kind of happen and, by osmosis and, hey, we won today, right? That's not how it works. You train, you develop, and you get prepared for the game so that when it's showtime, you can show up.
And when those people who you hire and make a promise to are feeling a fulfillment on that promise, then the company, I think, is positioned to be its best, to shine at its best. And
that's right. I love it. And one of the things, Janice, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. I think for leaders, I always tell leaders that one of the best things you can do, and I talk about this in the book, is, share with your people some of the challenges. Let them see you, let them see the real you, and also see some vulnerability, right? So, when you've got a challenge, share that with the team.
And leaders sometimes, let's think about people like Richard Branson, right? Who was really admired as a leader for a long time and still is. Being vulnerable, whether they're sharing what's going on in their lives because they're, let's be honest, their contracts, if they are hired leaders, if they are employee leaders and not founder leaders, typically will state how far they can go. speaking about, but they can show vulnerability and they can show win and fail to win in other ways. I mean, whether it's going up in a hot air balloon or, taking a hike up a mountain and taking longer than, your team to get there. There are ways that you can example through honesty, your relationship to people that I think not only brings respect to the team, I think it brings a trust that they can sometimes not be at top.
Exactly.
Order to get the team to top, as you talked earlier about.
That's right.
Taking care of the team.
Exactly.
You're not the first one to get there, and you don't plant the flag.
That's right. And one of the easiest ways to do it is I used to do this with my sales team all the time. Let's say at the beginning of the year, you get the numbers from your CEO of like, this is where the team has to, hit. Here's where we got to end up. And so now what I would do is take that, especially overseeing sales, right? And go sit down with the team and say, okay, guys, listen, now I could be a typical leader and lay out, okay, here's how we're going to get it done. But I wouldn't. I would always go back to the team and go, okay, guys, listen, here's what we got to bring in. We got to bring another, 20% in this year. And I'd love to get your thoughts of how you think we can do this. Right. And then I'm just sitting back, shutting up and letting them talk through and, writing every idea. And sometimes, Janice, when the idea comes out, in your mind, you're like, we're not going to be able to do that, right? But instead of squashing the idea,
you go, well, I'm glad I asked.
Yes, exactly, right? And so every idea gets put on that whiteboard, right? Or however, every idea gets documented. No ideas get shot down, which is a lot of times what because if as a leader, a lot of times if it's not going to work, you will have a tendency to shut it down. Well, we can't do that because of blah, blah, blah. But I always tell people, don't do that not at that first stage. The first stage is just let them flow with the ideas.
Just whiteboard it. Just
whiteboard it out. And then every time it's like, oh, okay, that's really interesting. And if you don't understand something that they're saying, tell me more. That's like my favorite line. Tell me more. It's really interesting. And so you get all that done. Then it's like, okay, guys, this was fantastic. You gave me like 100 different ideas. Now, 100 ideas might be hard to execute. So talk amongst yourself. Like, I'd love to get your thoughts of what are the top 20 we can do this year. Right. And then you let them hash it out, have the healthy debate, et cetera. And that's good because that builds the teamwork. Of course, if you've created a team that has trust within it, everybody feels seen and psychologically safe to share their ideas, share their thoughts, disagree, et cetera. Then let that go on. And then from there, get them to narrow down to here's what we think we can really focus in on. Fantastic. So now let's put some timelines into this, right? So they're creating the entire plan.
Finish of that, because that's very much a mirror of how we do things as well, Stephanie. But you studied me, so you know that. At finish of that, now you're moving from collaboration on agreement to actually you're going to implement and execute.
Yep.
And so people have ownership in that. They have clarity around that. And I think they have an investment in it that the outcome really can be fairly distributed. So I think it's candidly, regardless of how it iterates from organization to organization or articulates from CEO to CEO, I think it is highly foundational for how businesses can grow, can thrive, and can be of service to their communities today.
Yes.
It just has to be that, because when you have a room full of people who are bringing their ideas, they're bringing their experiences and their communities in there as well. So I think it really does create quite a strong fabric. And I'm glad you walked us through it. Something else you do is you walk around with your daughter. I understand you travel with your daughter. Now that's got to be a beautiful experience for you. Is it, Stephanie? And what's she teaching you about this new world? That's opening your eyes up. You're opening hers. How's she opening yours?
So whenever I speak, my daughter travels with me. So she works with us, and she's 33. She just turned 33. So Janice, first of all, you know this. You have adult children. When they go away, you're like, there's a part of you that your heart's like, I'm so used to being this, soccer games and cheerleading and like doing all this stuff. So my daughter, who is an amazing child, she's just an amazing kid. I'm like so glad that God blessed us with her. And so we get to travel, whenever I'm speaking, she comes with me, and her job is to really be the behind the scenes. So she's taken photos. She's, helping build content. She's doing all of this stuff as I'm, either preparing for the speech or I'm getting ready to do the
And
speech or
paying
in the
attention to
speech.
what you can't.
Exactly, 100%. And then from there, she's downloading it to my marketing team, and they're posting on social and all this. And so I'm surrounded by 20 and 30-year-olds, right? Because this whole social media thing is like, but they understand it, they know it, and it's fantastic, and it keeps me right there, being able to serve more people and from all over the world with providing them with content, right? And so that's what it is that she does with me. But my daughter, it's so funny because every single speech, yes, I'm a professional speaker, but certainly every speech is different. The speech itself is similar, but every audience is different. And so I have my fair share of nerves as well, right? Before you've got to get on stage and whatnot. And so my daughter is so funny. If I'm having a speech and it's like something's not quite right, and I'm trying to still work through it and figure it out before I've got to land, in that town and do the keynote, whatever. I remember one day waking up and I was a little nervous about this particular speech. It was a really important speech, but I just wasn't feeling like it was flowing the way that I wanted it to. So I wake up and she and I always share a room together, and I kind of open my eyes, and in my mind, I'm starting to think through the speech and so on and so forth. And my daughter looks at me. She goes, "Well, good morning, beautiful. It's gonna be a great day. You're gonna crush it, mommy." So she's my hype girl, right?
Yeah.
So I love that. But she's got a really big heart, and she always has, like even as a little kid.
Well, speaking of her heart, I heard she started a nonprofit called Elevation Society.
Yeah.
Would you mind you telling us about that, or at least how you feel about?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Work?
She started a charity a while back, and it's called Elevation Society. And Elevation Society it has evolved since then, but it really was focused in on suicide prevention for adolescents. Because if you look at the younger generation, unfortunately, their number one killer is suicide. And so I asked her, because part of me is like, oh, is there something I need to know, and what happened? Because what caused you to create a charity about suicide prevention, right? And so she shared with me that she had a good friend in college that committed suicide. And what was happening during that time is this friend had, the friend was like, it wasn't, if you don't know the signs of depression, you wouldn't think this person was depressed. You just thought she was nice, friendly, like everything was going great for her. And I remember my daughter was sharing with me that the friend had reached out the night before to Brittany and was like, "Hey, call me when you get a chance." And Brittany's like, "Sure, no problem, but I've got to study, I've got to do this." And then she thought to herself, "I'll just call her in the morning." Right. And then the morning, of course, never came for that friend. And so that really impacted Brittany, my daughter. Mm-hmm. And that's what made her create this particular charity. And the charity was really all about getting people together and allowing them to have a place that if they're starting to feel unlike themselves, that they have a community that they could go and do stuff together, or talk about. My daughter's minor in college was psychology, and so just creating a place that a lot of times when in her findings anyways, before people start really getting into a depression, a lot of times it's a loneliness thing or not being around other people. And so she was trying to create a community that would serve that benefit.
Well, Stephanie, that is huge. That is beautiful. And I pause 1 second just to honor that. There are so many leaders who don't have the exclusive or the luxury getaways or private societies to be able to take care of one another in the way that they individually only experience, right? Mm-hmm. And so when you think about your journey to the top, and you are riding the top, I won't say that you've reached the top, but you're riding the top, because who knows what's next for you. There are some hard truths about leadership that often get glossed over. Leaders don't openly talk about depression. They don't often talk about fear. What rough patches do you think catch even the most prepared leaders off guard? And this is too short a conversation to solve it, but what are some thoughts on it that could help, especially for those leaders who are part of our family now, who may be leading from places of competition in their careers where they still feel fresh or new, or they feel thinner or lesser,
Mhm.
prepared than corporate leaders.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. And I'll probably answer that a couple of different ways. And so,
Okay.
yes, leadership 100% can be a very lonely place. And I think because of that, people may not be prepared for that loneliness, right? So in my organization, it's funny. It's funny that you brought that up because we're actually pivoting parts of my brand because I'm really focused on the next tier of leaders and helping them be the leader that knows how to lead today's modern workforce. And these are leaders who are not, they're probably more director, VPs, senior VP. They're trying to get to the C-suite, and that's
Mhm.
their long-term goal, but they're not there yet. And so, how do we get them?
And admitting frailties or opening up, even in
Yes,
the most
yes,
embracing and transparent organizations,
yep,
can still impact a promotion or,
right.
yeah.
Exactly. And so one of the things that does have to be addressed more because you're in the people business and, it's really hard. And I think all of us who have, been in our careers a long time, somewhere along the line, we've worked for leaders that were insecure or that operated in fear. Maybe fear of making the wrong decision. Maybe they were micromanagers. Maybe they were, people that were all about, perfection. I mean, whatever it is, all of us who've ever had to work under that type of leadership, it's hard, right? It is hard. It's brutal. And so where I want leaders to really think through and, in any, just, whether it's leaders that I work with now on the keynote side, or even as I was coming up through the ranks, right? Is to one acknowledge that leadership is lonely but how do you circumvent that, right? And because you can't talk to your team, I mean, you can only talk to them about certain things. You can't really talk to them about this kind of stuff. And so you've got to be able to surround yourself with like-minded people because there are other people who are going to be going through the same exact stuff you're going through. And so though it's a lonely, leadership can be a lonely place, it
Mhm,
also doesn't have to be, right?
mhm.
And so that's the other side of it, that you've got to be open, and whether it's joining a peer group, joining a mastermind, YPO, WPO, there's a lot of different places out there that you can kind of
Back to
plug in.
vulnerability.
Yeah, plug in so that you're not by yourself, because it really is you've got to, iron sharpens iron, but also you've just got to have a
Yeah.
place that you can go, oh, like this, I'm having a rough day, or this sucks, you know what I mean, or whatever. And so that's the first thing. Second thing is also being open enough to be able to have those conversations,
Mhm.
right? Because if you don't, then what happens is the next tier comes up and they've never seen a leader not have a vulnerable situation. And so they think that they've got to like carry the mantle as well. And then they're crumbling on the inside. And so I'll give you an example. One of the things that I used to do when I was overseeing sales teams, or, as leaders, we know our job is to develop our replacement. Leaders develop leaders. And so one of the things that I would do is as I'm developing my successor, one of the things I would always teach this person in particular is to say, listen, as a sales leader, for an example, let me paint the picture. Usually sales, you bring your team in, they're kind of usually all virtual, living all over the place. And, once a quarter or whatever, you bring in your salespeople and you have sales quarterly meetings. And then usually the sales team, after the day of meetings, they end up at the bar and, having conversations and talking about their particular regions or what have you. It's kind of the typical way, right? What I would always do is, I may stand down there and kind of mingle with everybody, maybe have a glass of wine, and then I would always leave. And I would leave, not because I didn't want to hang out with the team, because I actually wanted to hang out with the team more, but I would leave so that the team could hang out with themselves.
Right. That's what I do
Because,
too.
because you have to give them a place that they can talk freely about whatever and you not be there, right? Because if you're always there, then you're still always the leader and you're
Right.
going to
They got
kind
to
of,
be trusted to be with them.
yes, yes. And so you have to really leave and let them have that time for them to talk about whatever. And they could be talking about you, right? You never know.
Right. Right.
So when I was creating, when I knew that I'd be getting ready to go on to another level, and so I'm creating my successor, if you will, I would always train them on that. It's like, listen, right now you're part of the team. Like you're that guy or that girl, right? But now what I need you to do is you find yourself to find an excuse as to why you got to go up into your room and do some work and leave them to be by themselves. Not only was that training for the team, because the team didn't necessarily know I was training that person to replace me, right? That person knew, but it was also training for that person. How do you feel now leaving when the party's just getting going? You know what I mean? How are you able to handle it? Can you go upstairs and do something else? Or are you like having FOMO and feeling like I need to go back down there? I want to hang with the team. Because those are the things that when we think about training leaders and developing leaders, it's not just the dollars and cents and the technical part of getting the job done. It is all, so much of it is the EQ part of it and the emotional part of it and the vulnerability part of it and all those types of skills that we don't talk about enough.
Well,
And
you've been looking, Stephanie, into the brain science behind leadership. Now, how does understanding what's going on with the gray matter in our heads impact or help us connect better with folks who are different than us in ways that matter to them?
Yeah, the biggest part, there's a lot of pieces to it, and to your point in the book, I hit a lot of the science side of it.
Yeah.
But in most of my speeches, I'll tell you, when I speak to leaders, what I speak on specifically is not just leadership, but the science of a conversation. Because as leaders, we spend well over 90% of our day in conversation, right? And so we need to know how to have the conversation right. And so I talk about the science. What is the brain doing during a conversation? That's really what my keynotes are about. And so when we think about how do you lead people who are not like you, back to your question, the brain is going to automatically, this is instinctive, it's nothing you can do to override it. The brain is going to automatically put people in your in-group or out-group because the brain's a predictive model. And so whatever you've fed your brain up until this point of your life, when the brain sees somebody, right, even if they're just in your sphere of influence,
Right.
the brain, the part of the amygdala back there is going to be figuring out, trying to scan and make sure, like, are you friend or foe? And so it's trying to keep you safe. But the most important part of that is that your brain will instinctively, whoever it meets, instinctively put them in. You're in my in group, you're like me, or you're in my out group, you're not like me. That is going to happen instinctively. Nothing you can do about it. That kept you safe and our ancestors safe. So there's a good piece to it. But now, as the world has evolved, it's not serving us well all the time, right? And this is why it's important that you know how to lead people who are not like you. Don't see them as this big threat because you've never been around people like that, right? And so that's issue number one. Now, though you can't override that instinct, you can feed your brain different information so that down the line it starts to override that instinct. So your goal as a leader is to actually be a leader who has a big in-group, right? Most of us have a big out-group. You're not like me, I'm not familiar with you, and so you're going to stick people over there.
Like technology, lots of technology is designed to weed people out, not bring people in.
Yes. And so what I like to teach leaders and really work with them on is what your job is to do is to increase your in-group so that there's more people who are, your brain's like, oh, there, and that goes back to my childhood, really, because as a little girl, when I said I can interact with all kind of people, because I've probably met somebody who was actually very similar to them in some shape, form, or fashion. So by default, my in-group's bigger, right? But what I want to do is teach leaders how to also make their in-group bigger, because that's the goal, so that your brain's not so quick to go, they're my out-group. And because then what happens from there is now all the unconscious bias starts creeping in, right? And then that makes you just not effective as a leader.
And you stop learning.
You stop learning. It's just, it's a big downhill spiral. And so if you, and I was just going to this one point is, if you think of not just in business, right, but businesses are global. So we think of business and then the country and then the globe, so it's got a ripple effect of being able to override that part of your default system in your brain so that you're not so quick to place people in an out group who are not like you. You got to figure that piece out.
Yeah, it fractures you from having a complete circle.
Yeah.
So Stephanie, if you were setting up a leadership training ground for, let's say, the upcoming leaders, right? Tomorrow's leaders, what key situations would you make sure they had to face during that training ground?
Yeah. Well, because my real specialty is all about leading people who are not like you, what I'm looking to do is bring up leaders who have courage. They have to be courageous.
Mhm.
This is a unique time for all of us, no matter where you live. But you and I live in North America, so we probably have more sensitivities to that. But everybody has to be courageous. You can't sit back and let somebody else do it and hope it doesn't impact you. It's going to impact you. And so, how do we raise up leaders to, have the I don't know the word I'm looking for, the I'm going to say
Mhm.
bravery,
Yeah, the
to be able to,
just
yeah, exactly, right, because leadership is so much more than just a title and pay, right? It's really all about, if you really, again, I go back to, for me, I think of it, one day I'm going to be held accountable and answer for the people that I've been blessed with being able to oversee, but did I help them or hurt them, right? Those are my two choices. So I'm really focused on, how do I help them? And help means grow, develop, challenge, could be a million different things. But when I think of leaders, new or seasoned leaders, right? Because seasoned leaders, the ones who have been doing it the same way forever,
Mhm.
they're just as vulnerable because they've
Mhm.
always done it that way. They just sit in the desk, bark out orders, and expect people to fall in line.
Mhm.
That ain't happening. Like, these generations are like calling people's BS, right? Going,
Mhm.
hold on, wait a minute, why are we doing it that way? This is, and that's actually what we want. We actually want people to not just fall in line. How we grow, how we have stronger teams, how we get the teams to really produce and perform is when you have a healthy team that can challenge the status quo. That's how we get better, right? So what I would look at for new leaders coming up is, one, you got to have the courage. You have to be able to say something when you see something, because if you're leading people who are not like you're going to have a whole lot of opportunity to exercise that muscle, but you have to be prepared to exercise that muscle. So that would be the most important thing to me, just because that's where I'm really focused. And the other side of that is, how do you communicate that, right? Because it's all about how you say it, when you say it, how do you deliver it, how do you hear it, all of that. So communication is really important. And I think we don't give enough credit to communication. And for me, I'm incredibly grateful that so many companies bring me in to speak, because I'm speaking about something different. I'm not there to tell you the basics of leadership, right? I think there's a lot of great speakers, a lot of great books that actually cover that far better than me. But I do have a very specific thing that I speak on. And that's because I don't feel like anybody's talking about it, which is, how do you have a conversation that actually hits the mark? There are trillions of conversations right now, Janice, happening while you and I are talking throughout the globe. Trillions. And a lot of them aren't hitting the mark, right? And so then, if we take that, whether it's family, friends, what have you, but if we just narrow it and bring it down to business, a lot of us, if we're being really, intellectually honest, a lot of conversations that leaders have are just not hitting the mark. If it was, we wouldn't have Quiet Quitting and the Great Resignations,
Right.
right? So
And
we got to get this under control.
you're so right. And when you consider all that you've seen during your career, and
Mhm.
just what we've been able to talk about in these few minutes together,
Mhm.
kind of bring it full circle for us, Stephanie. Where do you see this ally approach taking us in the near years?
Mhm.
And what do you think will be the big shift in leadership, and can be the big shift in leadership, if ally leadership is in place? Two different questions.
Yeah, yeah, and hold me accountable for answering them both.
Yeah.
So when I think about ally leadership, I'll give you a funny story, actually. When I wrote my book, a lot of people who've not written books may not know. What you then do is you give your book to beta readers, and the beta readers will read it, and then they'll answer some questions that you have for them. And the whole purpose of the beta reader is to make the book better, so when you actually publish it, it's a really stellar book. So for me, I did, because of the topic that I'm talking about, right? I made sure that my beta readers were really diverse. So men, women, gay, straight, young, old, like you name it, it was in my beta reader. But I also leaned really heavy on white male executives, because of the quote, the statistic that I laid out, which is 87% of corporate
Yeah.
is led by white men. And so I wanted to have an extra dose, if you will, of white executive men on my beta reader team as well. Here's what's really interesting: none of them know each other. And yet, every single one of them, Janice, came back to me and said, Steph, like, love the book. And I said, well, tell me how it made you feel. Because this book, listen, I am all about, human behavior and all that good stuff, but I'm also coming in hot. I'm a child of a soldier, right? So my words are quite clear. And so I said, how did the book make you feel as a leader? And they said, you know what? It made me feel like I had to think, which is what I was going for. And it made me also feel sometimes uncomfortable, which is what I was going for, because that's how change happens, right? And I said, did it ever make you mad? Because that I was not going for, right? And they're like, every one of them, like, no, it didn't make me mad. And if I was getting close to like, I'm really uncomfortable, like now I may step over into being mad, you came in with the story that showed your vulnerability that released me from that. Okay, so this is important. Then what they said is, I think that you need to not make this just a one-off book. You need to make it a movement because you're onto something here. And that is really what ally leadership is all about. It is a movement because I do believe, now just think about this, Janice, you and I, we're probably similar in age. So, leadership has evolved over time, right? But the world has changed over time as well. But just think about if we as leaders, or just as people, forget leaders for a second, just we as people, with everything going on in the world right now, how spectacularly different would it be if we all knew how to communicate and hear each other and, be able to have a healthy, discussion, even healthy confrontation, right? And we knew how to listen. And I mean like actively listen, not just like listen so that you can get ready to say something else, but really listen and understand the essence of what's being said. Because listening has so much to do with body language and facial expressions and what you're hearing and the words that are being used. And I always tell people, really usually the most powerful words are unspoken. So imagine if we had that as people, how would the world be different? Now, since we're talking about business, let's think about business. What we've been through, up until COVID and the pandemic, business was functioning. Yes, the employee engagement scores were continually going down and things of that nature. But then, when the pandemic happened and then we had the great resignation or the great, quiet quitting or the renegotiation or all that stuff, what leaders then had a slap in the face on is like, where you thought your people thought your job was paradise was like a prison to them. Everything changed. And now all of a sudden the employees were like, wait a minute, I'm not going back in that office. I want this, I want that. And there was a power shift, right? And now all of a sudden the employees had a lot more power and they could decide what they were going to do. And some of them decided like, I'm out of here, right? And so it threw everybody off for like the first couple of years. Like, what is going on? Leaders were confused, employees were confused. Like it was a big ball of mess. But what that says to me is that this didn't just happen because of the pandemic. This stuff was brewing, but we just weren't paying attention. And so now when I think of what the ally leadership movement is all about, it's about paying attention to your attention, right? Pay attention. I believe that being a leader is an honorable profession. It's honorable. I love the fact that people trust me to, in something that's so important, which is their career or their livelihood or, what have you, right? So I take it and I wear it like a badge of honor. However, because I know the responsibility of leadership, I know that I can help people, I can hurt people. I know that there's that responsibility as well. And so what I'm looking to do, and what I'm not going to just sit around and kind of complain and go, somebody should do this. No, I'm doing this, right? I'm focused on making a movement. And the movement is all about leaders knowing how to lead people who are not like them, who have the courage and the bravery to do this tough stuff, have the hard conversations so that we can move this thing in the right direction. We've been a little stuck and stupid over the past few years, and I'm looking to do my part to grow leaders so that leaders get back to that place of dignity and respect and not like run around like our hair's on fire, but literally being able to be reminded of our job is to serve. We serve the people that we have the honor of leading. And that means that my job is to make that human be the best human that they can possibly be to fulfill the purpose while they're been put here on earth. And I'm a part of that whole equation. And so I want to do my part to help them be whatever it is that God created them to be. I play a small role in their journey, but I'm going to play my role and play my part to the best of my capabilities. So I really want to grow up leaders that are not all about, I want the big check, I want the, the private jet, and I want all the status for myself. I want them to be the leader like that 4-star general that I saw. She had all the power and she was like giving it away to everybody. I think that's true leadership.
Well,
so I don't know if that answered your question, but I went along.
It answered both questions. More importantly, I think it allows us to have such a mirror to our own potential. And no matter how on top of our game, no matter how successful or teaching we may think we are, to be able to hear you articulate in such a dynamic way with such a great discipline and also a humility is absolutely beautiful. Your career is so important to us as you're approaching it right now. I want you to come back and talk more with us. I really do. And when you come back, I want you to talk about what we do as leaders in terms of how we're working with the teens. The teenagers now. They've got so much information and so much power between their two thumbs that we never had. That the responsibility to that, certainly as a child growing up in a military family, you can appreciate that power, And I think I think you've got something there to do for us as a world too. But right now, Stephanie, you got to go 4 for 4 with us, okay?
Let's do it, Janice. And thank you so much for having me.
Oh my
this
goodness,
has been so fun.
Girl. Are you kidding? Are you kidding? The only thing missing is whatever kind of pie you like best, okay? And next time we'll have the pie.
I want the pie.
We'll have the pie. But look, I'm going to ask you 4 questions. You'll give me 4 answers. There are no right or wrong answers, okay?
Okay.
And the first question is, you're hosting a dinner. You can have anyone you want present at this dinner, Stephanie. They have to be a real person, though. Can't be Siri, can't be Alexa, okay?
Got it?
What was it? E.T., U2, or whoever, right? So who's at your dinner? Who's at your table and why?
So I would have, of course, I will start with, I will have Jesus, because I got lots of questions, Janice. I got lots of questions, but that would be my very first person that would be at the dinner, and I would just ask a lot of questions about not just why am I here, right, and whatnot, but just all the other stuff that got up to this point, right? What was that whole journey and walk like for him? So Jesus would be one. The other person, my father, of course, I just told you he's been passed away for the past couple of years. So I would, you always think about all the things that you would say now. So that would be a great thing. The other person I would invite is Colin Powell. And I know that he has passed on, but as a military child, he was the first of a lot of things. And he was another one that when I watched him, how he carried himself, and especially when he was overseeing
and how he loved his wife. Oh, Eva was so well loved by him and cherished by him. You learn a lot about a person by how they treat their spouse.
By how they treat it out. You know what? Bingo, like that. You're right. You're absolutely right. And so, and when you think of like his upbringing and where he grew up and how he made it, through all of that. And so I have a tremendous amount of respect for him. And so I'd love to sit down and be able to ask him a lot of questions.
Leaning in on that, and I'm interrupting you, but you still got 2 more people. But just thinking about your choice of, Colin Powell, to think, because I was in his presence several times, and a civilian, that's quite an outstanding thing for me to be able to say. And I watched the respect and the awe and the blushing that a lot of the women around the table had when he came in once when we were at the White House and he came in.
Wow.
And I watched it as you watched that similar reaction of respect and awe when you served a hot pastrami sandwich. I believe it was hot.
Right, exactly.
In any event, to witness that and to see how he was that person who, with all the strength at his fingertips, he chose to be a gentle leader, a fiercely gentle leader, and he chose to be a loving, disciplined, personal
Mm-hmm.
citizen, and I just find that I find that intoxicating.
So do I. And I love, like, I just, and again, my military background, I think, has a lot to do with it. But when I see, generals and just how they carry themselves, and it's a sight to be seen if you've never, like, you've been able to be in the presence of General Colin Powell. So you've seen it. And people, maybe the listeners that maybe have never been around, top brass, if you will, especially when it comes to the military, there is a way that they carry themselves that is so incredible. And I love it. I love everything about it, and just so much respect, so much incredible respect.
Yeah.
Another person that who is alive, and I've met her before. I talked to her on the phone. Actually, somebody introduced us, but I would love to spend more time with her. I'm going to give you two more people, and you probably know both of these people. So if you can make this happen, Janice, let's make it happen. But one is Ursula Burns. Because knowing that she was the first black I think black CEO period, right, male or female, for a Fortune 500 company, like what was that like? And like I said, I've had a conversation with her before, and I didn't have time to ask that question because we were talking about something different. But I think that, the challenges that we've all had being the first, we all have our story, but that was like the first, and so what was that story like? And then also Ken Chenault, which I've never met him before, but I have a tremendous amount of respect for his leadership.
He is a
wonderful
man. I've had the blessing of actually being in his home as well. And he is such in a group meeting, and he is such a generous listener.
Nice. Wow. Is that not the best thing you could say about somebody? I mean, really, that goes back to, right, being able to listen, and some of the most powerful words are the words that are not spoken. So I love what he's done with, what he did with Amex, and just his leadership and his guidance. And though they're not they're doing other stuff, but though they're not leading companies anymore, but you see them come out in the forefront in different times when it's needed. And I respect that. And so I know what it's, I've had my journey of being the first, and the challenges that it brings. And so I admire those that came long before me. You yourself, Janice, like I said, before we got on live here, I was like, I've known of you and studied your, when you act, I think when Act One was one act, right? Now you've got all, a whole lot of stuff going on, but you admire that as a young, I'm not young anymore, but as a professional coming up, I'm paying attention to those, and because that gives you guidance as to how you carry yourself, right, with dignity and grace, and against all the different obstacles and turns and tribulations and all that stuff, right? How do you carry yourself in such a way that there's the dignity and whatnot? And so that would be my dinner party. But, then as I'm still in that same mode, there's, Michelle Obama, Barack Obama. There's so many people that I would have at the dinner party even though we're talking about, like, I live in Texas, so I saw recently Laura Bush. I recently saw her in, I think she was shopping in Nordstrom's or something, and just how she carried herself. Now, she got security all around her, obviously, but people were like, "Oh my gosh, Laura Bush," and she was so gracious, and just. I think when you have so much authority and power, and when you use it correctly, that for me is where I give my respect, because I know
when to speak and when not, because she I worked on her book program when she was first lady, and I remember going to the White House. I remember meeting her, and even though everyone kept waiting for her to take full advantage of the platform she had, she, I thought, skillfully and eloquently gave that platform over to those of us there. And I remember leaving there with such a respect for her, because when she was silent, it wasn't around not wanting to speak or having a conservative voice that was not welcome to a group of people who were visiting her in her home, because that was her home. The people's house was her home. It was more from you are welcome here and you have a voice here. And for some of
Yes.
you, this may be the only time your voice is heard in this room. And
Hmm.
I thought, again, how generous. I mean,
Yes.
generosity keeps coming up, doesn't it? And
Yes.
gratitude in how we're
Exactly.
talking about things, Stephanie. So I'm
Hmm.
going to know when not to speak and allow you to speak as well. But
No, I love this.
that is gorgeous.
Yeah, I love these stories because you're right. Generosity keeps coming up. And when we think about leadership in our country, and I don't mean on the political side, I mean, I won't even touch that, but just in business in general, I do believe that we've had a leadership epidemic for many, many years. And the pandemic just kind of brought it to the surface. And so here's our time as leaders to be able to regroup and reset, if you will. But do it in a way that we can use examples like we are just talking about, Laura Bush and General Powell and Ken Chenault, and use those as examples of how to do it correctly. Because you can still produce, right? You can still produce and get the profit and all that other stuff you got to do, or win the war or whatever. But you still can do it in such a way that you still treat people kindly and with grace and dignity and whatnot. So I think that I'm an optimist. I'm excited about this new wave of leaders that are coming, Janice, because we've had the examples. We've kind of lost our way for a little bit, but now it's like, okay, we can right this ship and get back to being the type of leaders that are full of integrity and grace and generosity, and that people want to emulate and be just like. That we are proud to tell our kids, like, oh, look at so and so, right? So, anyways, those are my. I gave you more than four, but it'd be a fun party.
Well, we'll move a dinner party to a pool party. In our garden party. In any event, Stephanie, the thing that's exciting, so exciting about this
Mhm.
conversation we're having, for me,
Mhm.
moving ally leadership
Mhm.
forward and making it
Thank you.
the agenda on every leader's page
Yes.
is exciting, because as we integrate AI more and more and more,
Mhm.
leaders are going to need that very soft skill you're teaching in a very
Yes.
hard and dynamic way. And
Thank
so,
you.
so I'm so excited about it. Shall
Thank
we
you.
go 2 for 4?
Yes, and one thing I want to say that I forgot to say about
Okay.
ally leadership is in the book they get free an assessment that they can take, and to see kind of where you are right now in your ally leadership skill set, and then you can take the same one again when you're done reading it if you'd like. It's a simple 10 question type of thing, but I had a neurologist actually create it. And so, because so much of when we think of the brain, so much of it is a brain situation, right? We can't excuse the brain out of the situation because it's in groups, out groups, bias, unconscious bias. So much of it is brain science. And so we have, as when when you're part of the ally movement or you purchase the book, you get a free assessment that you can do at your own home. Nobody needs to know where you fall into the category, but at least you know where you're starting. And then by the time you're done with the book, I encourage people to take it again and see kind of where you are, because the
Because you
goal is
can't
to
call
open the
yourself an
prize.
ally. You got to get somebody else to do
You
that.
got it,
So
exactly.
you better be checking, right?
That's right. You got to be honest with yourself,
Okay.
But okay, what's my second four?
2 for 4, Stephanie. What 4 pieces of music, not podcasts, music, are you listening to, and why?
Oh, yes. So I have, it's interesting because, and I'll give you probably three different genres. So when I'm entertaining and full transfer, and I'm looking because I want to get this name right, because my brother, who I said is my best buddy, he's a musician, and his style is so incredible. So I always listen to his music when I'm either entertaining, because it's usually all music and instruments, right? And it has like a really low vibe, like kind of jazzy kind of feel, if you will. And he just dropped a new one yesterday, so I was listening to it this morning, and I was like, I'm loving this, dude, right? So, but my brother, I gotta give him shout out, because it's a nice, classy, smooth, and for his stuff, either I'm entertaining and I have it in the back of my head, or I can hear the background, or I'm working and I just want music
Oh, well,
right
you got to
over.
share it with us. We can work and listen as well.
It's called Selah,
Okay.
low-key lo-fi moments, and lo-fi meaning like low vibration, low, type of thing. So it's super just mellow and cool. And he's got this heart. I always say he's got the heart the size of, Texas. I mean, he's just such a generous guy, a great older brother, right? Just a great older brother. So anyways, I'll give you the link and all that stuff. You can post it. But that is one thing that I listen to. So when I'm entertaining or when I just need soft music that clears my head, I always go to my brother's stuff because because he's got a certain rhythm. If you
You
will.
didn't give his name.
Oh, his name is they call him because he's so well known, especially in Boston. His name is Joe Sumrall, but they call him Joe Jam Sumrall. Okay. Boston's best bass player, right? And so just a phenomenal. So yeah, Selah moments, Joe Jam Sumrall, Sumrell. My other stuff is I'm like really, because you know what, Janice, and I very much feel that I'm walking in my purpose. And I think, our purpose has changed and so on and so forth. But right now I'm in the flow and I'm excited about it. And ally leadership is a part of it. And so I spend so much time, could probably still spend more time, but I spend a lot of time when I start my day just in worship. And so the different music that I listen to there's like 2 songs that are really high on my list that I've been listening to over and over and over again. But I will tell you what they are, just so that you're aware. One is called, and I've never even heard of this group before, but I've been listening to them on nonstop for like the last couple of weeks. It's called The Land That, the song is called Sound Mind, Sound Mind. And the singer is Melissa Hessler. And it's a worship song, and it's really just about a clear sound mind. And so I love that. And then my other song that I've been listening to is, and I love this group in general, it's Elevation Worship. I love Elevation Worship. I love Maverick City. I love Tasha Cobbs.
Your daughter's movement was Elevation.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But this particular song it's Elevation Worship, and the song is called All of a Sudden. And it just talks about, how God can move all of a sudden, right? And so I've been really spending a lot of time with that. So when I'm in my worship mode, it's, Maverick City, Elevation Worship. I go to the Potter's House, so there's always amazing things happening there.
You're a member of Potter's House?
I am.
The Potter's House Foundation.
Yeah. They're the
Potter's Foundation.
Yes. Oh, are you? Okay. Yeah. Oh, I didn't realize that. So this is, he's, I love how he takes the word.
Did you love Sunday service?
You know what? I was actually traveling Sunday, so I will listen to it probably not even tomorrow because I got to do
I won't spoil it for you.
Oh, okay.
It's aligned with a lot. Anyway, keep
it. Nice. Okay,
so
good.
What are you listening to?
Okay. And so then, though, when I am in the mode of I'm like, I grew up in the 80s and 90s, right? And so, listening to the hip hop guys and gals of the 80s and 90s, so like the LL Cool J's or the, Snoop Dogg, when I want to get my groove going because I'm getting ready to either compete or go, get on stage and I got to hype myself up. Right? So old school hip hop, I do love that as well. And let's see, you want 4. So I said my worship, I said my brothers for entertaining. I talked about my when I got to get my head on straight and I'm like, got to go, pump myself up. That's my old school hip hop stuff.
Day was a good day.
Exactly, right. What would be my 4th genre? This is a good question. My 4th one. You know what? It's so funny. I recently was listening to old, Chaka Khan, old school, music recently. And it was Chaka Khan. It was, who was the lady? I don't think she's even alive anymore, but it was the emotions and all that. I was listening to that whole vibe back in the day. And so recently and DeBarge and Switch and, all that stuff. So that would be my other genre, but I guess those would be the 80s.
That's a playlist in and of itself.
That's mellow R&B. And so it takes me back to high school.
What we would call homecoming music.
Yes, exactly. I like that. Exactly. You know what I'm talking about.
Okay, Stephanie, we're going 3 for 4.
Okay, what's my other one?
What 4 books do you recommend our family read and why?
Yes. Okay. So, what's funny? When I was writing my book, I actually stopped reading all books because, you just don't want to start inadvertently, not even knowing, taking somebody else's intellectual property. So I didn't do any reading. And now I'm trying to catch up. So, of course, I would recommend my own book, Ally Leadership, How to Lead People Who Are Not Like You, Get Part of the Movement. That would be the first one. The other one is and you might know Bozoma St. John. She's a friend of mine as well. And she wrote a really great book about her life, Urgent Life, talking about love and loss because she lost her husband when she was fairly young and not a newlywed, but just all the, where she's gotten now in comparison to where she started. So I'm a big fan of that particular book because I think it's very heartfelt and it kind of shows the messiness of human life, right? And the unexpected, yet how to survive it. So the Urgent Life I really like. There's another book that I think you might know. I think you and I may share Patrice Gordon as a friend. Do you know Patrice? Yes. So Patrice, love Patrice. And Patrice, she has the reverse mentoring book that came out not this year, but a couple years ago, I think. And she gave me the book and I didn't read it because I was in the middle of my own book and I knew that there would probably be some
How did
overlap.
you meet Patrice, if you can share it?
Say that again?
How did you meet Patrice?
So Patrice is amazing, and probably for your listeners, we could say she, lived in London and worked for Richard Branson, and was in the finance department on the aviation or Virgin Atlantic. And Patrice actually reached out to me. She'd been following me for years, and aviation is a big industry, but it's really small as well, and especially as you get higher and higher up. And so she, as a young Black professional, in aviation over there in Europe, was following my work and whatnot. And then she reached out to me and I responded. And then, from there, a friendship really was birthed. And so she was here not too long ago, funny enough, going to a conference at Potter's House. And so we finally met for the first time. Other than that, we've always been like on text or on Zoom, but we never physically met. And we met more recently when she was here in Dallas for a Potter's House conference. And she's just amazing. Like, I love the work that she's doing. I love the concept of reverse mentoring. And for your listeners, it's really all about, if you're used to being the mentor, then with today's changing workforce and workplace, it gives you an opportunity to utilize, like I do with my daughter or the younger people I have surrounding me. They mentor me on how to do things like social media because they're much more advanced than I am in that. So it gives us leaders who are used to being mentors an opportunity to realize, like, hey, you can be mentored by the younger generation or whatnot. And so that's what Patrice's book is all about, which I'm reading that as well. Just got started on that. And then my last one is a friend of mine.
Before you leave that, let me just share with you that I happen to feel Patrice as like my second daughter. So that's why I wanted to just allow you the time to talk as much as you could about her, because I adore her. Her passion for elevating the potential of people and having them do that through looking outside of themselves and other circumstances is not just something that I admire about her. It's something she's actually doing and making a difference for executives.
That's right.
So you can't be in leadership and not be aware of Patrice Gordon. And when you talked about her that way, I was like, okay, don't cry. I love her so much. And when she was in Dallas, likely we were together.
Probably, so maybe.
I didn't touch.
Yes.
But likely Patrice and I were together.
Yes, but you know what? That's probably true, because I think you were probably here for the conference. I think it was the Woman Evolved, but not this one. Yes.
We were together.
That was the first time that she and I went to dinner, and that was my first time meeting her in person. And I was like,
one step away from meeting each other in person.
Hey, see, there we go. Next time, since you
as you talk, I'm going to go ahead and just text her. I don't know what time it is because she's in
London somewhere.
Yeah,
and she travels so much. Who knows where she is right now?
I'm going to let her know I'm talking with you right now. So how do you like this?
That's right.
Right?
And we're all going to go. That's right. We're all going to go for dinner one day when we're all in the same city. Somehow make that work,
Okay, Patrice, guess who I'm talking with?
And we're having a love fest about how much we love you.
In a love fest over you. I'll say that to her. Okay.
Exactly.
You keep going, girl, because you owe me another one.
Yeah. No problem. And then the last one, and I just started this one. I know this gentleman, but he gave me his book last year. But again, because I was in the middle of my own book, I didn't want to read his stuff. But he's amazing, Dr. Henry Cloud, and he has a book called Trust. And his book is all about the psychology of trust. And so I've heard him speak. He and I have shared the same stage from a speaking perspective and whatnot. So I'm reading his book, and I've been pulling out different bits and pieces. But trust is at the end of the day, everything revolves around trust. It either rises or falls on trust. And so he comes at it from a science specific way, but that's a book that I'm also reading as well, is Dr. Henry Cloud. So those are my four. But the book that I recommend to all leaders is from a mentor of mine. She's passed away since, but her name is Judith Glazer. And she was the creator. She and I created a program together on the sales side called Neuroscience Selling, powered by conversational intelligence. So when I speak to salespeople, I'm focused on how does the brain show up in a sales conversation. But conversational intelligence is actually a form of an IQ that she created, and she was my mentor for many, many years. And and so I've learned a lot from her. And she has a New York Times bestseller book that, even though she did this book years ago, I still recommend it to leaders. It's still incredibly powerful, and it's called Conversational Intelligence. And when you think about it being a form of an IQ, we have IQ, which of course tells us how smart we are. We have EQ, which tells us how emotionally aware we are, right? And CIQ, conversational intelligence, really is the skill set of being able to prime someone's brain for trust, partnership, and mutual success when you're speaking to them. And so a lot of my work is really, the foundation was laid with the work that she and I did together. And now when I speak to leaders and I talk about conversation and the science of conversation, a lot of that was also birthed when Judith and I, when she was my mentor for many, many years. So I'm carrying on her legacy, if you will.
Oh, wow. Well, you know what? I just ordered it, so I'm looking forward to it arriving. And what does it say? It says it's going to arrive. Oh, wow. It's going to arrive pretty quickly.
Nice. It's going to arrive by the time we're done talking. They can do all kinds of stuff with drones these days.
Quickly, but it's October 16th.
Drones are everywhere.
It'll be here. And you know what I do, Stephanie, if I really like a book or if it's highly recommended, I order it in hardback.
Oh,
but
nice.
All my books I do digitally as well.
Nice.
Authors get some type of credit and some type of prestige from a hardback buy.
Yeah. And you know what's, I did on Friday, finished my audiobook recording.
Yeah.
And that was because I don't listen to audiobooks, right? There's one audiobook that I bought that I listen to. And whenever I listen to it, it's like a lullaby story. It makes me fall asleep. I go into like this deep, peaceful sleep. And so I'm like, okay, I don't think audiobooks are for me. So when talking to my
you haven't been listening to Bishop.
Right. Yeah. I'm a hard copy, like highlight kind of girl. I'm old fashioned like that. But I went into studio to record my own audiobook because going back to school is never out for the pro, and we have to learn from from whatever the newness is. And so though I don't listen to audiobooks, I know that a lot of people do. So I went in studio, recorded my audiobook, and that was such a fun experience. It was so fun. And because I'm a speaker, I was like, well, I'm going to record it as if I'm telling a story versus like just reading it on the page, and I had a ton of fun. So hopefully you'll order that one day and you can tell me if I nailed it or if I missed the mark. But I had fun doing it, so that was good.
You got it, and I'll be really quickly back to you with it. Okay.
Oh, thank you.
Well, we're going 4 for 4.
I was gonna say you have I'm so close. Like we gotta finish what we started, Janice.
Finish strong. Okay. Stephanie, what 4 pieces of advice do you have for our family who are listening right now that you've not already imparted with them? And if any of that advice is something that was shared to you, please pay homage to the author of the advice. For
sure. The very first piece of advice I would give, and this was shared, and it wasn't just shared to me, it's been shared a lot, but I think it's always worth repeating. It was by Carla Harris. And one of the things that she said was always know that any major decision about your career that's going to happen, you most likely will not be in the room. And so what she meant by that is that, when you're working and doing a good job and all the other stuff, literally your executives are having conversations about who do you give the next project to, or who should you move overseas, or who do you promote, or what have you, and you're just not in the room. And so I take it one step further, which is to say, then it's important that your brand be able to stand on its own. And a lot of times we don't think about our personal brand. You know, we all work for a brand, but you're a brand within the brand. And so as leaders, especially nowadays, and thought leadership is really, really prevalent, because a lot of leaders are starting to realize like you really do have to have your own brand. And so the question that you have to ask yourself, especially as a younger leader coming up, is what will your brand stand for? And so I'm a big fan of that piece of advice, which is just know that most major decisions about your career, you won't be in the room.
As we just talked about with Ken Chenault, not
that's right.
work for a company.
Yes.
An employee.
That's right.
Or General Powell.
Mm-hmm. You know? Exactly. Yeah. So you have to always be thinking about what is your brand? What does it stand for? And every day you're walking that out and making sure that you protect your brand at all costs and the reputation of it. So that would be a piece of advice I would give. So that's number one. Number two, make sure that you know that how to be a great communicator. There's nothing more important to me than being able to communicate. And whether that's with your family, your kids, you know, your job, what have you, communication is we were born for human connection, and communication is a part of that. And so you can't escape it. Whenever you hear of something horrific going on in the world, Janice, the number one thing is usually they were a loner. Right? Like, you know, they had no human connection at all. And they certainly didn't have, you know, communication, right? And so what I would just tell every single person, but, you know, whether you're raising kids, you don't have, leadership may not be your thing. We're all leaders in some shape, form, or fashion, but you must know how to communicate. So that is something that I would recommend. Spend the money, invest in yourself, take ownership of your own learning, especially up and coming leaders. The company will, yes, have trainings and developments for you, but that's not usually going to be enough to get you to stand out from the crowd if you're trying to do big things. And so in order for you to stand out and have that competitive advantage, you're going to need to probably invest in your own leadership and learning and development beyond what the company is providing for you. And so that's only if you want to do big things. If you want to be mediocre, then keep doing what everybody else is doing. But if you wanted like really...
Mediocre is expensive as well.
Yes. Oh my gosh, it's more expensive, right? That's a really good point. So invest in your own learning. You know, you don't have to have your whole life figured out right now. I think that puts a lot of pressure on people. You know, I once heard Adam Grant say something that I quoted in the book, which is people are always being told, follow your passion. Well, the truth of the matter is you may not know what your passion is, right? But when you start doing stuff, you could start to see like, hey, I'm actually pretty good in this. And then that makes you passionate about it, right? And so it's just kind of a little bit of a reverse mentality, if you will. But, you know, and then that leads to my fourth point, which is I really want people to just take the first step. I think there's a lot of pressure, especially on the younger generation, which is really the majority of the workforce right now. But there's a lot of pressure to have life figured out. Nobody has life figured out. And if they tell you that they do, it's not true. And, you know, don't hold yourself to what you see on social media, which is really somebody's sizzle reel, right? So you're not seeing the raw footage, but you're seeing the sizzle. So that's not realistic. But for you to make sure that, you know, just take that first step to begin, right? Like, don't make it overcomplicated. I think we overthink stuff sometimes. Sometimes it's just not that complicated. Sometimes you just got to start. And so that is one of my favorite sayings is to begin. Just take that first step. It's okay if you fall all over your face and make mistakes. That's how you're going to learn, right? Nothing beautiful grows, you know, on top of the mountain. It all grows in the valley where the rocks and the water and the tribulations and the testing, all that happens down there. And that's where your growth is going to happen. So be courageous. Don't be afraid of it. Have the tough conversations. Do the tough stuff. You have to be a person of courage. Nobody wants to hear about how brave you are, and yet you don't take the first step, right? Like you've got to, all this comes together with, in my opinion, and this is what I tell myself, don't tell somebody, show somebody, right? You got to show up to go up. And so, you know, it's less talk and a lot more action. And it's okay if you make a mistake, you fall on your face. It's okay. That's the only way you're going to grow. And that's the only way that you're going to learn. And so but do it so that you can learn, because the key to winning, and this is in the book and I actually back it up with all the science, the key to winning is winning. Right? That's how you actually get really good at winning, is just by winning a lot, right? Just like the key to making good decisions is making decisions. So it's not too complicated. We're actually not as complicated as we make life to be. You want to get good at decision making, make more decisions. And that means sometimes you're going to make a bad decision, you're going to make the wrong decision. You get just learn from it. And then wipe the dust off your feet and move on. Don't let that put you in a chokehold where you can't continue to move and function. Yeah, you made a bad decision. Most likely, unless you're a brain surgeon, nobody died. Okay, so you make the decision. You're like, oh, did I learn from this? And then you move on better for it. And so that's really where I want people to get to. And I'm, really passionate about this, because I think we can spend so much time overthinking things, beating ourselves up over stuff that really doesn't matter, and listening to people that you probably don't even know, right? So it's like, who cares what they got to say? So really be focused in on, why am I here? What am I called to do? What am I really good at? What are my gifts, my talents, my passion? All that stuff comes with time, but then start to execute. One of the things I have learned as being a military kid is you have got to literally execute. You don't win the war just thinking about it. You got to actually take those steps. And sometimes they're scary, and sometimes they're hard, and sometimes you'll misstep, sometimes you'll trip, all that stuff. But life is, life be life, and sometimes, but you still got to execute. And then once you do it more, the more you do it, the more you know how to get up, wipe the dust off your feet. You're like, okay, yeah, I learned that lesson real quick. All right, now on to the next thing. It gets easier the more you do it. Right now, I'm concerned because people are so afraid that they don't do, and they just think a lot.
They don't have the advantage of boot camp.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, right. You can do this the hard way. Go join the military, and they can teach you that way, right? Or you can just take those steps each time. Have confidence in yourself. When I used to coach executives many years ago. And one of the things that I learned over that time is that they usually always had the answer. The hardest part of being an executive coach is not telling people the answer, right? Executive coaches don't actually tell you the answer, but they ask you really pointed questions so that you come up with the answer, because most likely you already have the answer within. Mm-hmm. And so that's the thing that I want to convey to your listeners is you already have the answer within. You just have to trust yourself. And if you make a mistake, it's okay. Learn from it and you're better for it. And then you move on and try it again.
What you're sharing here is so important, because you being a military kid, mm-hmm. and speaking about ally leadership, all of those principles are what has to exist in each of our nations that are allies to one another. Yeah. And when you bring it back to the level of person, so then it is person to person. I'm so ambitious about your career, about what you are doing, and I'm so grateful to have welcomed you to this family. Stephanie, from my heart to your home, thank you.
Thank you so much for having me, Janice. This was so fun, and I'm glad that you and I now have our relationship, because you've been somebody, like I said, from afar, I've watched you and so incredibly impressed and proud of what you've done. And little did you know, you didn't even know me, but you're like, okay, I'm watching, I'm observing. This is how you do it. Okay, this is how you do it. So thank you for inviting me into the family. And thank you for being an example for me many years before I ever got to be part of the family.
Awesome. Yeah. And now my kids can walk back through. Have a great evening.
Thank you so much. Bye now.
Thank you.